And what I really wanted to do was take kind of your average 10-year-old, which means an adult can use it also, and give them the power to create something that typically would take a Pixar artist, weeks to create. And this is all done through the intelligence of the tools, and really, I think this is a long-term trend in computers, is the fact that computers are going to enable people to do more and more creative things with less and less effort, and therefore they have much more ownership over this thing. And so really, this is an aspect of storytelling, because what people do in these games is they will take this creature out, and they'll actually drive it around in the game and have to, eat, survive, eventually mate to get back into this editor and design the next generation of this thing. And in doing so, they're basically creating a story. And typically what games have done up to now is they've kind of put you in the role of a protagonist. Here's who you are. Here's the backstory. Here's how you save the princess. And so basically you're Luke Skywalker or Frodo Baggins. But in something like this, what I really want to do is put the player more in the role of J.R. Tolkien or George Lucas, where in some sense, as they play the game, they end up creating every aspect of the game, of the creatures, of the characters, of the environments. I'm going to pop out of this real quickly and show you one of the last phases of the game here, which is there's a whole lot of the game that I'm just kind of skipping over right now. But basically what happens is you actually evolve your creature through many, many generations. You get to buy more parts, add it to it. You might become a carnivore. You might become a peaceful herbivore, social pack animal, whatever. Eventually you actually kind of go through, these are some of the other creatures that were designed by other players, as a matter of fact. Now, as you're playing this game, let's say you're a creature living in this little environment, competing with other creatures. The other creatures that you're competing with are actually coming from other players automatically. So as you play the game is actually building a model of the player, and it's populating your world with things that it thinks are appropriate for your world, but they were made by other players. So the process of playing the game, you're making a lot of stuff, a lot of content, but it's also stuff that's being automatically downloaded to other players' games. So every time you play the game, you're encountering the creativity of other players as well. So it's a shared universe that players are building as they play the game. Now, this is much later in the game. Eventually, you kind of go through tribe, civilization, all the way out into space. And so this is one of the later phases of the game where now we have high technology. We actually have this little UFO thing. Up to now, we've been playing the entire game on the surface of this one planet. This is where we've evolved. This is basically our home planet here. And in some sense, this is like a little toy planet that we've given the player. And so there's actually things like a very simple little food web here. There's a simple climate. We can actually kind of leave this world. We can bring things with us, biological samples, and go out and start exploring other worlds here. So as I pull away here, this is our home solar system. We see some comets, some other planets. Let me do a little cheat here really quick. So in some sense, I think of these things as toys. I went to a Montessori school, and I was always very impressed with Maria Montessori's kind of approach to education, which is that if you can kind of build the right toy and let somebody directly experience interacting with it, that they will discover really interesting principles on their own. And so in some sense, I kind of wanted this to feel almost like the ultimate philosophy toy. That in playing with this toy, this toy universe, toy planets, toy creatures, that players would automatically kind of come to realize and trip over interesting principles of life and nature and science. Things like the Copernican principle or the anthropic principle, Drake's equation. These are things that just kind of are naturally a result of the situations that come up while playing the game. So here's a little planet that I've come to. This is maybe something some other players created, probably populated with other creatures, and I can do things like abduct the creatures and then bring them and try to actually bootstrap whole little ecosystems. So I'll just grab some here. In some sense, I can kind of use my UFO as a butterfly net, collecting things with my abduction ray. I can use these to actually populate an entire kind of food web on another planet, and or maybe even kickstart a civilization. I might come across a tribal planet and try to get them to worship me. Basically, all the genres of science fiction that I enjoyed as a kid, you can kind of replay in this. We have a monolith I can drop in, kind of spark intelligence and make a race and become sentient. I can play War of the Worlds. I can become basically build a federation. I can also just kind of play with the toy planet and understand kind of long-term principles. One of the things about these toys that are interesting to me is the fact that I think a lot of the things that we're screwing up the planet with now are a result of the fact that we don't have long-term intuition. We basically have short-term intuition over the space of a few years or maybe a human lifespan, but we have very badly calibrated instincts over millennia and centuries. And so with something like a game, we can actually fast forward all these processes. One of the things I can do here is I can actually kind of start playing with the planet climate. So here I'm going to start injecting some greenhouse gases, and over time we'll actually start seeing things like extinctions and ocean levels rising. I could actually melt the planet if I wanted to. And in fact, one of the things I'm trying to do in the game is actually terraform planets and stabilize the biosphere. But basically the idea that I can give somebody, some kid or an adult, a toy planet, have them kind of experiment with it by kind of playing with it like a guinea pig, poking and prodding it and seeing what the long-term results of it are, means that you can start, at least in some sense, calibrating long-term instincts for these things. And in some sense, I want to give like every 15-year-old kind of the ability to be a god in this little limited kind of toy world, and then get a sense of what kind of god, would they be? Would they be a vengeful god, a nurturing god? And just get a sense of the really big picture of life as you stand back. And as we pull back from this, basically we're dealing with a world here that's being built collectively by the efforts of all these players. So this is our little home system with a few planets in it. As we pull back kind of to the interstellar level, we actually get kind of the local star system around our home star. And we're actually seeing things like Hubble objects, planetary nebula, black holes, other stars. Each one of these other stars has other planets. There are literally millions of different planets that are actually created by the other players. But this is actually a very, very small fraction of the entire galaxy, which is the world, which is being built collectively by the millions of players playing the world. So it's basically an unlimited number of worlds that are built by the players as they play the game. So I'm going to stop the demo here and invite John back up to interrogate me. Thanks.
That was great. That was great, Will. One of the things that immediately leaps out at me is, having watched the Dennis Muren presentation last night, I feel like I'm looking at the absolute mirror image of what he talked about. For those of you that saw it, he took us through, actually you mentioned War of the Worlds, he took us through all the artistry and the wizardry that went into one shot of War of the Worlds, and all you have to do is sit back and eat your popcorn and watch. What you're saying essentially is players want to be Dennis Muren and do all that stuff themselves, and that's what's really compelling about the entertainment experience. So what I'm wondering is, can these two kinds of entertainment experiences sort of peacefully coexist, or as we go forward toward 2012 and people are more and more able to do sort of Dennis Muren type stuff, is that going to become more compelling and the old form of watching movies less compelling?
Well, I think what's happening right now is, kind of the old media model is that there's this big wall between the kind of consumer and the producer of content. The movie studios over here making big budget movies, they throw them over the wall, and then the fans go sit and watch, the movie with popcorn. What we're seeing now with media, not just computer games, but I think computer games are kind of leading the way, is that we're actually breaking down that wall and building a ramp now between, so people can do a little thing on their home video, put it on YouTube, actually have a few people watch it. It's amazing just having a few people watch what you've done, watch what you've made, give you a little bit of feedback, how motivating that is for certain people, and they'll start climbing that ramp. At which point you'll start dealing with limitations of talent or resources. But the fact that the ramp exists is kind of tremendously important. And something like that, in some sense does exist in a world like sports. Anybody can kind of go out and play a pickup game of basketball. Doesn't mean they're going to be a pro basketball player, but basically there's a very staged kind of development. I can take it as far as I want to. Right. And I think media is just getting to that point where also the tools are enabling people to be far more creative than they thought they could have been. And I hear this from people that play games all the time. In The Sims, we have this facility, as we're going to have in Spore, where players can actually capture a video of what they've done and use it as a very simple movie development tool. Right. And these are people that if you'd ask them, are they creative, they would have said no. But they start playing with these games and get a high facility at understanding how to operate it and move the camera and all this stuff. And in some sense, for them, it's almost like learning a musical instrument. Right. And they want to kind of show that skill in playing that instrument and actually perform it for other people. Right.
That's interesting. Another thing that strikes me is Dennis also talked about the amount of energy he puts into making things look real. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the whole sort of experience of watching the movie. You have to believe that's real. Striking aspect of Spore is that it doesn't look, photorealistic. It looks a bit cartoony.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in your decision-making process there. Why did you choose to make it look that way? And do you see there's another form of realism at work here, which isn't a visual sort of realism, but a realism of system dynamics beneath that visual aspect?
Well, there are a couple of answers to that. Number one is that the computer games industry has been driven by graphics realism. It was an arms race, basically, and every year it was like the games looked better and better and better, but there wasn't enough thought in terms of how real the world was and the dynamics and the physics and all that. What actually is remarkable to me is looking back at the games that I played in my youth, like in the 80s, these little pixelated characters that were like 20 white pixels, how real they seemed to me. Even though the graphics sucked, the fact that the real character wasn't living on the screen, it was living in my imagination.
Right.
And that it took such a simple representation was enough to spark a real kind of emotional response to my imagination when that little character blew up was remarkable to me. And I think that's really kind of where the real game resides, is in the player's imagination. But also, if you look at the history of art, basically you had painters trying to